too much. I've got too much. I've got too much in my inventory. So I'm over encumbered. Over encumbered.
We call it the Breach. It's a massive rift into the world of demons that grows larger with each passing hour. It's not the only such rift, just the largest. All were caused by the explosion of the Conclave. An explosion can do that? This one did, unless we ask. Unless we act, the Breach may grow until it swallows the world. Each time the Breach expands, your mark spreads, and it is killing you. It may be key to stopping this, but there isn't much time. All right. So where were we? Apologies for being a day late. I had a work thing I can get out of today. So here we are, a day late. But yes, we are over encumbered and ready to unburden ourselves this week on the topic of classes in gaming. Just three of us this week, joined, of course, first up by PJ, aka the Lies of PJ. How are you, mate? All good?
Thanks, Tom. Great to be back and with a real meaty topic this episode. I've spent the last week grinding the absolute fuck out of Claire Obscure 33's clusterfuck of an Act 3, taking several hours to beat the final boss. Simon, any listeners playing that game, take my advice, beat the main story, which is exceptional, and then get the fuck out of Dodge. Anyway, just a quick update on our socials. Then we'll introduce you to our sickest of miscreants. So we are on Bluesky and YouTube, Over Encumbered Pod, and over on Musk's shit show, that's over. What is that? That's a hyphenated, lower hyphenated? I don't even know what that's called.
Underscore. It's a zero.
Underscore. There you go. It's been a long day. Over underscore encumbered over on X, but with the O actually being a zero. If you remembered that, I don't really care because I'm not even on X anymore anyway. Anyway, as I was saying, we are joined tonight by Nima, or Thema, as he will now be known. Thema, we spoke to you 2 weeks ago, and the one statement I can make with absolute certainty is that you will not be playing the same game that you were then. How goes it?
Yeah, good to see you guys. Missed you last week, but great pod. Good to hear from our, Irish compatriot over there and hear him say the word prick a few times. So platinum hunting, I think, still is a worse sickness than my FOMO or Thema, as I've become known. So I'll take it.
It's a less expensive sickness, though, I'd say. It's definitely better for the bank balance. I feel like you both, like Paddy comes at it from a perspective of like maximizing the value, whereas you come at it from a very sort of like scattergun. Let's just spend the vast majority of my budget on games. I suppose it's notable you don't have kids at the moment.
That is true.
So
yeah.
that might be why you have the extra disposable income compared to the likes of us who need to wrench every bit of juice out of the games that we're playing.
Indeed. I mean, we were in the kind of waiting room, just ready for the pod to start for a full 30 seconds, Nima. And in that time, I think you mentioned 4 games that you played in the last 3 days alone. So, where I believe you've gone into the latest Death Stranding. I think that's been your main recent pastime. How's it looking?
So it's good. I've done well. I've finished the prologue, got through episode 1 and 2. So I think there's 17 episodes in total. And I'm really enjoying it. It's the best kind of photorealism I've seen on any game of this generation. And it's not even a PS5 game, right? It was out in the last gen. So I've just kind of got into grips with it. I appreciate that once you've played it for an hour or two, the photorealism in a vast empty space kind of, maybe for many players, it will wear off and, they think it's a novelty and it's done and it's a walking simulator. But I must say, so far for me, I've not reached that level. So I actually think I can get through the 30 to 40 hours required. But the main thing that's driving me is that I know it's a game with its flaws, but it sounds like Death Stranding 2 is meant to be a return to his best for Kojima and Kojima Productions. So it sounds like everything that isn't as amazing as it could be in Death Stranding 1 is way more action orientated and combat. And there's just a lot more going on in number 2. So far, story's great, environment's great. And it's just a chill game to play with nice music over, walking over mountains, basically. And I love hiking. So that's my review so far.
Great stuff. And that will be your review,
end. Probably. That's probably it. Yeah.
I'm never here for you again.
I'm I'm considering playing the first one. I'm in a bit of a limbo. I've obviously finished Clair Obscur, and I've just been kicking around a little bit on Baldur's Gate, mainly just playing around with the patch 8 and all the mods. But I'm not sure I've got the full 100 hours of replayability in me. But I'm looking for something a little bit more relaxing after the button bashing frenzy of the end of Clair Obscur. So I'm going to pop up to Sex. Is that actually how that shop's pronounced? Anyway, I'm going to pop up to Sex tomorrow to look for potentially an old version of Death Stranding because it was a little bit expensive on the Xbox and PlayStation store. I might also, with a great game, which I know you love, Tom, which I've never actually played, but I fancy maybe giving a whirl to, is the Outer Wilds as well. So
Yeah, that's very good. It's actually one of those really cool sort of like infinite loop games when you kind of learn more and more about the story as you go through it. God, I've played that an awfully long time. But no, that was really, really good fun, that one. And it's a different kind of, it's a change of pace, isn't it? Because I think
I think that's what I need.
We were both saying after KCD, weren't we, that like you need to have that sort of like the rebound game that you're not really too kind of you're not looking for a serious relationship at that point. You just want to kind of keep ticking over, and that's what game's quite good. Like,
I think I could normally go 2 or 3 than you, but then I suffer. Like I went straight from KCD into Clair Obscur, and I think I played Dark Souls 3 before Kingdom Come. So I am exhausted at this point.
And
so
Rebirth. Don't forget Rebirth.
And Rebirth. So, I need a game where I don't need any motor functions from a thumb coordination perspective.
I assume you haven't done have you done Hades? That's
That's the last thing I want to do.
Fantastic,
that's a crazy game.
Blue, I think it's like the Blueprints is one I'm quite interested in giving a go. It's because
Chef.
I've tried a few levels of it, but very early days, like 1 hour in, maybe 1.5 hours.
It's like roguelike or roguelite. I can never remember what the difference is. There is actually a difference, and not synonyms. But it's one of those rogue something like puzzle game, which sounds like a really cool concept. Someone was telling me, my friend James from the FPL community was telling me that's definitely worth kind of a look, and each run's kind of like 15-20 minutes, something like that, so that could be quite good. And if not, there's always sort of card games out there, aren't there? Like
I'd say it's this year's Balatro. It feels like in terms of like a game that just came out of nowhere, got a very good rating. I don't remember seeing much hype about Balatro at the time, and I didn't really see anything about Blueprints. I didn't even know it was launched, and I just looked in Metacritic, right, and it was like one of the top games
very
of the year.
well reviewed. I'd not heard of Balatro until you guys kind of recommended it to me, and then became uncontrollably addicted. I blitzed it for a while. I'm now at the step where I'm on the final level for every deck, but the final level is just so hard that it's now resorted to basically whenever I take a shit, I try and do a level.
I think you've overtaken everyone in terms of like the furthest.
So hard for last levels, so hard. I've done one of them, and I think there's 12 decks, so it might be 14. Just so, really, really tough.
I don't think you're going to complete it.
There's a 1.1 update coming as well, apparently.
Really?
At some point, the local Funk, who's the guy who kind of made it, was talking about it. It's so Slay the Spire you can play on your console. What else? Like Monster Train, they're quite good sort of like roguelike card games, which are kind of quite good fun just if you want to just while away a little while.
We'll see.
A little bit of time.
I'm taking it easy for now. I've turned Shadowheart into a werewolf, so I'm quite happy with that for now.
No, fair enough. I went away this weekend, so I lost a lot of kind of gaming time. I was saying to you guys, I was humming the Lumiere song from Clair Obscur all holiday, and I was told by varying fan members that I'm being annoying, shut the fuck up, stop doing it. I've got that song in my fucking head now, please. I don't even know what it is. I just remember you going, anyway.
Wait until you found all 33 records to platinum.
Did you do that?
No, I didn't know.
I was going to say, that's wild. I'm looking forward to Paddy.
No, I didn't. Once I realised, I did briefly consider platining it, but then once I realised there was 2 tasks that I couldn't even complete until I'd done a New Game Plus run, I was out. So
I think after this is going to be interesting because I've similar to you. I've got Atomfall to play, which I probably will give a go to, but there's been quite a few sort of things like Outer Worlds 2 that we were speaking about in the group chat earlier on. That's really cool. It feels like they've kind of done the prototype on game 1 and then properly gone to town in 2. So I'm
Yeah,
really
yeah,
looking forward to
yeah.
that in the autumn. And then there's another
Very
a
excited
few
about
games
that.
like Crimson Dawn and the vampire one. Is it Dawn Walker or something like that was announced the other week.
Yeah, the Witcher guys. Yeah, that definitely looks promising. Yeah, so
Yeah,
fingers
so there's lots
crossed.
of really
Yeah.
fun stuff on its way. Right, so yeah, I suppose that's
Yeah.
all we're playing right now. We'll move
Yeah.
on to, I guess, the main topic of this week, which is quite a meaty one, isn't it, BJ?
I think definitely is. So, you know, this week we're focusing, I suppose, less on a kind of gaming mechanic, although we're kind of come on to that, but more the kind of combat classes in kind of gaming. Best summarized by your classic foursome, really, of warrior, sword, shield, big ass weapon, however you want to sum that up. Rogue, you know, stealthy, bit of daggers, bit of archery, sometimes obviously in there. Mage, magic. And then often a kind of like healer, kind of cleric kind of route as well. Dark magic, I suppose, that kind of class can obviously be split in kind of a few numerous ways. This obviously covers many games, many different genres, covers first person and third, also does sweep us reluctantly into the world of Warplay and MMORPGs, which is why Nima, who met his wife via that platform, is here to obviously kind of, you know, tell us how that kind of went for him. We will try to shut that down, obviously, when that gets out of hand and move on to some actual games. We're probably going to, you know, kind of move away from kind of guns and that type of thing. We're going to try and keep it in that kind of fantasy kind of setting today. But, you know, first off, Nima, let's bring you in. RPG, what do you kind of default to, and why, if you've got that kind of freedom of kind of combat wise, less say the kind of classes, let's in terms of how we're actually kind of fighting and controlling that battlefield within that gaming setting.
Absolutely. So I think I very much love having control. So if we're thinking like a Diablo or a World of Warcraft, I love the rogue. I love any character that can kind of stun lock an opponent, because I really like kind of PvP elements. So for a lot of games, even games like Uncharted, where they had a multiplayer mode, I love that stuff. So I've always loved online multiplayer, but I was kind of late to things like League of Legends, but I played another MOBA. And again, in that, I found myself playing a rogue. So I got to conclude that rogue has to be my favorite class, because every time I play a competitive online game where I sink like hundreds of hours in to fight other people online, it's always a rogue I end up like getting the best out of.
Interesting. I think you're right on the sinking hundreds of hours in on the sorts of games that I suppose. I mean, we'll talk about a few sort of first-person games which do include kind of a class or a style of play choice, you know, like the Elder Scrolls, and I guess it's not so much the case in a game like KCD, where you literally got no choice but to be a warrior. But I don't know, I was saying to you guys the other day that I don't feel like, in terms of this genre, I've played a multitude of games. If we're talking about kind of the tactical type of games like Dragon Age and Edition 33, but then we throw in World of Warcraft, which I spoke about in the first pod, that I spent a few years of my life basically wasted playing that, as well as kind of Dungeons and Dragons. I've played a little bit of that and other games. So slowly but surely, when I was thinking about it, it became clear to me that what I lack in volume and titles, I've kind of make up for the fact that I've probably played this genre more deeply than I have other types. I've sunk far more hours into these sorts of games than any other type. And I suppose in terms of, I don't mind the rogue class, and the rogue / hunter, I guess, would be the two sort of denominations of World of Warcraft. I think would be the two. I was too late to monk Nima. I don't know what that looked like or anything.
Yeah,
like
I
that.
was a bit late for that. I was too early for that. Yeah, I didn't really. I played in Wrath of the Lich King era, so it was the second expansion. And funnily enough, the hunter was my first class. Get to like level 10, 20, and then move back to rogue.
Everyone plays. I went warrior in World of Warcraft at first, but then kind of I discovered warlock, never looked back. And it's really always been for me like if it's the third person, and in that third person world set like a Dragon Age or South Park Stick of Truth has just come to my mind as an example of a mage
great
class
game.
we can go for. It was a very good game. And Greedfall was another kind of random game.
Greedfall was really good. Nobody played that. I enjoyed Greedfall. Yeah.
Greedfall 2 is currently out. It's currently in the beginning stages, but apparently it's rubbish. Anyway, but yeah, it pretty much it's always been and it's always a mage. And same with like when I was playing Baldur's Gate until my daughter was born, and I just was like, I can't spend the time sunk into this game. But I was mage in that. When I started to try Space Divinity Original Sin again, I can't remember why I abandoned that. I think there was another game that came out that I wanted to play more. I was on mage, but I don't know. I suppose the only exception would be Diablo, Nima, talking to your point, because I feel like there's something in that particular style where it's just about big numbers and feeling like
I want to see crits. So for me, it's all about, and I know a mage can land a large crit if you're built in the right way, but I want to like show up, see someone's got half health, they're a mage, they're a cloth wearer, I'm invisible, and suddenly like one stab assassinate, gone, dead. Honor points, honor kill, whatever, like big just numbers. Sitting there in the battleground. Yeah, big numbers, 10,000 damage, 15. Like, I just want to see huge numbers in range.
There's something lovely about that. But in Diablo, I love like being barbarian, especially Diablo 3. I spent many hours being barbarian and actually do the leap into the middle of the frame and do lots of like area of effect things. I think kind of it's all about area effects or AOE for me. That's kind of what I like to kind of do.
It makes sense because a mage and what you just described, they're both similar. Whereas for a rogue, that's the one thing I always felt I lacked. So when I wasn't playing PvP and I'm doing leveling up, it was really hard. If I tried to play a dagger assassination class, I wouldn't really get far. I'd have to take on one enemy at a time. I can't really do much. I'm getting killed as soon as it's 2v1. So I had to play combat rogue with like swords or maces to level up because you try to build a bit more durability and crowd control, right? So that's the problem. I think the class I like is only good for PvP. And actually playing a game, talking of classes I don't like, I always found warrior kind of a bit boring. And I had a friend who leveled warrior when I leveled rogue. And he had a great time because it was easy to level. He could sponge damage. But at some point, once he kind of got to end game, it was just everyone just wanted him to be a tank. And even if you're saying, I want to play as like a DPS or damage in the dungeon or raid, no one wants you because you're competing with them for their weapon drops. You're still not going to be like the best DPS necessarily because maybe you're a better tank. So that's the other thing, PJ, that I think you maybe missed is what about
most of the words that come out of your mouth are just kind of drifting out the window behind me. I'm not an online kind of gamer, so when I think of this kind of particular kind of question, I'm certainly coming in it from more kind of traditional kind of RPG D&D kind of roots, and so for me the combat is invariably linked to some form of kind of narrative in terms of what makes most sense or is most fun for me with regards to the particular kind of story. So I like playing as a rogue in particular kind of types of games because they tend to be quite kind of charismatic, for example, etc. So they can control the narrative of the game because they can kind of have quite a lot of conversations about. And with that, I would always pick a bow because bows are way cooler than daggers, and you can just basically run away and pick things off from a battlefield, which is a much more kind of cowardly way of doing it. So I would certainly come from that, but mage is definitely my kind of go-to kind of RPG class, just because I think it's just the most fun. And like you mentioned, that AOE damage is the same, regardless of whether it's online or you're playing, a single person kind of narrative, or even if you're controlling lots of characters like in Dragon Age or Baldur's Gate. I always look forward to that kind of mage's term the most because it's just the coolest, particularly if it's like fire or ice or elemental damage in some way. We were talking about obviously Claire Obscura before, where you control 4 or 5 different characters in that, but you don't really kind of get under the skin maybe of kind of 1 or 2 of them. But if I had to pick a character, if you could only play as one character from Claire Obscura, I would have definitely played as Luna, probably, because that was she's a mage who controls the battlefield. She has all the elemental attacks sort of thing. She's an attractive brunette, so ticks all the boxes. So
you like to follow them around, don't you? Obviously, in a virtual on games in a virtual context, again, mate, it sounds a bit dodgy. On games, you like to follow them around.
What do you guys think about hybrid kind of classes on that note? Because there's other games I play, like turn-based strategy games, like Fire Emblem, and in there, like they're kind of like kids. They go to a school, they train in a certain thing, right? They have A to D ranking and abilities. So maybe it's a lance, a sword, a bow, flying horses, fucking dragons, whatever, right? but over time they can like specialize and become like a dark knight or a paladin. It's like, and then you go even further, and so like in WoW, right, the mages, you could be like a blood mage, an ice mage, an arcane mage. So what are your views on hybrids? Are they fun, like a kind of druid class, or is it actually they're like a generalist but a master of none unless they're spec'd perfectly?
I think it depends on the game to a certain extent, but generally I love that kind of subclassing, and it encourages, replayability. I've played Baldur's Gate 3-4 times at this point mainly because of you can play, that ticks both boxes, in that not only can you change your class and change several classes, so you can play in a very different way in terms of from a combat perspective. There's also so much choice from a kind of narrative perspective as well in that, which is very rare. Most games don't tend to tick kind of both those boxes. They tend to kind of put you into kind of one of them. So I definitely a big plan of that kind of experimentation and get Druid is one of those classes which, when it's done well, it can be the most fun, But there are other times where, it just sucks ass, and you realise that all you're doing is wandering around growing plants, and you're like, "What am I doing? That guy's over there has got a massive flaming sword, and I've just entangled somebody."
Yeah. Well, you could turn into a big bear, or turn to a cat, or turn into a leopard.
I do like their mounts though. So like the fact that a druid can like become like a bird or become a horse or whatever, and just like a whale, and just like traverse all kinds of land. I love traversal mechanics in games. That's probably why I like rogues as well, because again, it's about being quick on your feet.
Any fast, like like Misty Step and Baldur's Gate, but anything like that where you can get in and out of a battlefield, cause a bit of damage, and then kind of piss off a little bit, because otherwise you've kind of almost got to play as a tank, which, like you say, is a bit boring, because otherwise you just get wiped out.
It's an alternative melee that I find I'm a bit more engaged. I'm not just kind of standing there taking hit after hit. I have to like think a bit more. Maybe it's like simplifying warrior too much, but I'd rather kind of know that if I get hit a few times, there's going to be serious repercussions. So I need to really think about my battles and pick and choose them, and take moments to rest and heal up, and really think about it.
Yeah, I mean, you got druid, and I guess in the World of Warcraft sense, you've also got like a shaman. I can never work out which one's the correct pronunciation of that. And then you got a paladin sort of class as well. It's kind of a bit of a spell sword, I suppose, as it were, PJ, where you've got kind of the healing ability. Shaman would be more sort of like you have a natural sort of druidic powers, and then the paladin would be like the holy sort of stuff, wouldn't it?
Holy priest, yeah, but holy warrior even.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. That kind of that can kind of work at times. It's just I don't know. I always kind of find, and we'll go into classes of kind of at least the kind of the three archetypes, and talk about kind of the fourth one a little bit more in a minute. But I kind of just feel like, unless I'm forced into being a warrior, a proper kind of straightforward sword and board like I was in KCD, it's almost always just the last pick for me. It's always the last thing. If I'm iterating on a game, I'm replaying it. So say if I'm playing Dragon Age Inquisition again, if I remember, actually I started to try to do kind of a quite straightforward sort of, I think it's the Grey Warden backstory, make it into a very sort of straight-laced sort of warrior kind of build at the beginning. I just find it so difficult to, I suppose, key into that kind of part of the story, speaking to your point, PJ, and I find it very difficult to really sort of empathize with the character. It sounds really kind of sappy, but it's very true. That's kind of how I get into these games. It doesn't really work for me. Whereas with the mages and as you said, the rogues or the bards or whatever, there's always a little bit more sort of intrigue about them, isn't there? And that can be what is the hook. I
think that's a bit of a cliche and a lot of fault of lots of games. That generally speaking, Henry was a kind of bit of a rare example, but even the games where, because where you have to play as a certain way, and I think we're not to dismiss this. This episode isn't just about where you get that choice. There are some games where you can only play as one particular character. You have to play as a wizard, or you have to play as a warrior, and those can also be really good as well. But they, you do kind of react in a kind of slightly kind of different way when you have that. Nima, I've got a question for you. And when less so obviously the kind of World of Warcraft stuff. But when you're
Like
in a
single player games and stuff.
when you're in a kind of single game set, when you create a character in game, I assume you're like one of those fantasy football players, which you'll do, who only plan for the first 3 games because they know they're going to wildcard. So absolutely no long-term planning going into your build whatsoever. It's just, whatever is going to get you through that prologue.
It's funny. So for a lot of games, like I do actually look up like early builds because of having not wanting to talk about WoW because we've moved on. But one thing I did take from that into future single player gaming is the idea of like power leveling. So you used to be able to even pay people to boost you to level up faster, fight mobs of enemies you couldn't beat yourself, or follow the exact best path. Now that's not, I know, ideal because in a lot of games you want to explore naturally, enjoy. And you were talking about how in a Clair Obscur, you don't really like the map as such. And like if you log out and you log back in, you don't remember like where you were going necessarily. But I actually enjoyed that because I was like, wow, I can just walk around a bit and see what happens. So I'm so used to having guidance and having mods that tell me which way to go, what's the quickest route by the meter to level up the fastest, to follow the perfect build. So that's something I've still taken into single player games. I would say I waste a lot of time in menus trying to like optimize that early build when maybe I should just level up a bit more and get better at the game mechanics instead of getting caught up in min-maxing stats that early in a game.
No, I feel you. I just wonder whether kind of, because we all seem to kind of prefer, I guess, either narratively or just in terms of efficiency, in terms of dealing damage, that sort of the DPS kind of style classes. I wonder if there's sort of a personality type which maps onto kind of classes in some ways. So if you're kind of a tank, think about like Alistair in Dragon Age 1 Origins, or I think it was Dragon Age 2 as well. Are you kind of the sort of the leader sort of type of the group, and you're kind of the altruistic ones or looking after everybody else? I don't think in World of Warcraft or in online games you can kind of spec out as a healer and just be kind of completely altruistic. But from our the fact that we kind of all nowadays, apart from Union with a bit of MOBA play, to kind of stick to single player RPGs, it feels like sort of a damage dealer is the more sort of efficient way of kind of controlling the battlefield and feeling like you've got more of an impact. Just because if it's your kind of custom created player, I just can't think of anything worse than you just being the tank, if that makes sense.
You're like running around just soaking damage or running around healing everyone, but you can't make people, lose the battle any quicker.
Yeah, I rolled a paladin on Baldur's Gate, for example, PJ, the very first time I played it, and I just had a terrible time. Like I just didn't enjoy it at all because all I was doing was basically just taunting, healing myself, healing everybody else, and then the very rare chances I did get to kind of have an attack, it was kind of the base attack, effectively, because that's all I could do. The rest of it was kind of all the other characters. They were all cool, but it kind of felt like my character was a bit of an empty void kind of on the battlefield, as it were.
Yeah, you don't want that. And I remember when I played Dragon Age Inquisition with Iron Bull, I would just shove like in the middle of a battlefield with I would never control it. You could obviously control. I would rotate between like the rogue and the mage classes, kind of controlling them myself, but I would never touch, not after the first few hours, and I would just like watch them out of the corner of my eye, just basically, like you say, taunt, attack. They don't even heal themselves. They have to rely on other people to heal them. Absolutely, useless. And they just, be there kind of. And I thought of actually button bashing to do that when there are so many kind of creative options around that is baffling. I think there's got to be questions have got to be asked if in that type of setting you're taking a mage and doing that for 100 hours. Sorry, not a mage, or a warrior.
A warrior.
Yeah.
At least with a mage, it's exciting. I feel like you can try and learn new like techniques, new tricks, new mobility.
Yeah. I mean, it does depend on it obviously, a big caveat is it depends on the quality of the combat. And a lot of the games we're talking about, the combat is quite suited to that kind of like, it's that kind of top down or turn based, and it's kind of it suits that kind of magic or rogue kind of base kind of build. When you're playing very combat driven games, like, if you play Elden Ring, well, obviously in Elden Ring, Night Rain is now out and you can play in kind of co-op and sort of stuff. that's you need the tank in that situation is suddenly the most important player on the battlefield. It has to be your best person, as it were, because they are going to be the person who's going to have to dodge most, parry most, deal the most damage, sort of thing. Your worst player in that scenario would be the wizard at the back, healing, doing damage
just doing long range.
Yeah, damage from a rear sort of thing. So that's a kind of quite a different kind of setup, because any game where combat is so key to it. So I always think The Witcher is a really good example. Even though you only play as one character, you can actually play Geralt in quite a few different ways. You can play him as a pure warrior, just doing swords and just fuck all the magic stuff on and just complete the game quite comfortably, kind of doing that. Or you can play it obviously with a very heavy magic build. Most players would probably play a kind of combination of it, and that the combat in that kind of changes quite a lot. Or you could be a complete sicko and actually use the crossbow. So there are. I like
surely.
it. No, well, there's got to be some people out there.
I think I only used it to shoot down the griffin or whatever at the start.
Yeah, that's literally it. Literally it.
And there was a trophy where you had to kill 10 people that were like poisoned and burning, and then killed by an arrow while they were on fire and poisoned. And I was trying to get that trophy throughout the game. I'd constantly be like trying to get someone with all of those negative effects.
No, this is my problem, and Paddy's like, this is my problem with platinum stuff anyway, because that's such an immersion breaker. Oh, hold on, let me just, when you've got side quests, which are so amazingly written as The Witcher 3, and you're taking time off that to try and poison an arrow shoot 10 people at the same time. It's like, fuck off.
Or the one where it's like used the spell to knock them off the cliff, the odd spell where he like pushes them back.
Yeah. To be fair, I did that one just because I love using Ard. But anyway,
I would say Geralt's probably one of my favorite examples of a hybrid class. Just on that topic, I think like he's not a full spellcaster, but he's a lower tier spellcaster with unique abilities. So having that with the combat is pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, 100%. I think he's one of the best characters in gaming, full stop. I think, but he's not just it's not just for the narrative and the decision making of The Witcher. It's how fun the combat, considering it's 11 years ago and it's not that's a bit clunky at times. But I really hope they don't fuck it up with The Witcher 4. Obviously, playing as Ciri, so I probably think it's going to be faster, isn't it? With that, she was even the bits where you controlled her in Witcher 3. She was a lot more nimble. Kind of in and out of the battlefield, I think. But if they can get that right, because I'm less worried about the the writing side of that. We know that Project Red nail that time and time again, but can they nail a very melee combat based game? Because I think that's something they've not really done kind of so far. So I think that's a big if with The Witcher 4.
The kind of the Ellie to the Joel almost. Can they make that sort of believable and make that kind of as ingratiating in the same way? No, I think that's all kind of fairly. Yeah, it's one of the things that I think it can vary a lot though. Like I suppose with The Witcher, because you don't really have much of a choice in terms of kind of you've got a limited choice in terms of how you play it. I'm thinking of kind of. I suppose sort of there's lots of other games like obviously Assassin's Creed, like you kind of can play as a tanked up warrior if you're thinking of Eivor and Valhalla, but if you think of in Mirage, you're kind of a lot more sort of leaning into the stealth and being that character. And the only thing that kind of does kind of cross my mind, I haven't played Avowed yet, PJ, but in terms of I don't know if I ever will, given your less than stellar review. But thinking of Tez, the Elder Scrolls, like in those games, if you're first person, I very seldom. I think I haven't got that many examples in my head of first person games that do allow you to have this sort of choice thing. In that, it's kind of always I've always defaulted to being a stealth archer in that, just because it kind of suits the concepts a bit better,
100%, it definitely does. And the way that the bow and arrows work really well, as do guns in first person. Swords and shields don't, and oddly, mage doesn't either. It just kind of I just never feel connected to it.
I don't feel immersion. If I can't see
in a way that with like Diablo and Boulders, and where you can lay down those kind of markers of the spells and sort of stuff. I just think that's just a lot more kind of fun to kind of play and control in a way. Whereas in Avowed, all I was doing, you whatever the spells are, whether they're ice spells or fire, was a little bit the same in Dragon Age. Vanguard, the Veilguard, sorry, whereby it's just not as fun. Just bits of ice coming out of your coming out of your staff in a first person setting. So for there, yeah, I'm defaulting to archery all the way, definitely.
And it's not just high fantasy, I guess. There are other games which kind of have proxies in terms of this. So, with obviously, same with 3D Project Red, you've got in Cyberpunk, you can kind of evoke some sort of mage style stuff with the tech side of it. I was thinking about in Guardians of the Galaxy, you had I don't know, have you played that one, PJ?
I have, yes. That was wild.
You had, but again, that was kind of obviously it was kind of sci-fi, but you still had kind of different. The characters could all do different things, which were loosely based on kind of the class archetypes. So it kind of spreads that way. I suppose the main sort of question, I suppose, is can we think of any games which go away from the tried and trusted format before we move on to each sort of individual of just having, if you've got a three person or 4 person setup where you have a tank, have some sort of healer, and then you have kind of 2 DPS. So that kind of just feels like the tried and trusted formula everywhere. Going across the D&D, like there's always going to be a tank. There's always going to be somebody with some sort of healing capacity, unless the tank can kill themselves or something like that. And then you've got kind of 3rd or 4th slots. So if someone's pissing around as a bard, playing some songs, and you've got some warlock casting some sort of terrible eldritch blast every 2 minutes does nothing. but
that's always going to be the case because of any game where you're controlling a party, basically, whether that's you're all controlling them all, a computer is helping you control them, or obviously you're playing online with other people. You need that balance. A bard has got no fucking chance on his own. He needs the support of other people. So there's that synergy between all the kind of different characters. So I think that's why it is the way it is. I certainly can't think of any at the top of my head. I can think of slight variations. So, a great game which you're never going to play but really should, Tom, is Wasteland 3, which I've obviously mentioned in our group chat a few times, which is an absolutely fantastic kind of third-person top-down RPG, but that's set in the Wild West. So there's no magic in it or anything like that. But so the magic users there would have the kind of grenade launcher and kind of lots of kind of robots and stuff you can kind of control in a kind of with that kind of evoker kind of way. And there's also the sniper. The reason why you'd love it is because the best characters by far are the snipers in that, and I know you love a good sniper, and they're very charismatic cowboy style kind of snipers in that game. It's a really great fun game. If there's anyone out there who's actually played Wasteland 3, because I've not met a single person who ever has,
I'm convinced you just
let me know.
I'm convinced this is just a very long-winded fever dream of yours. Some sort of just madness, demented fugue state fever dream that you just sat playing an empty.
It's great, and it's
going, darling, this is amazing. This is an amazing game, and your other half's come in and gone, you're not doing anything.
It's a great variation, and it's frustrating because I promise I don't recommend you lots of games, but it ticks all your boxes. Narrative driven, lots of different characters. It's basically Dragon Age Inquisition set in the Wild West.
Fine, I'll give it a look after. Maybe not after Terra Obscura, but I'll give it.
It's just on Games Pass.
All right. Okay. If it's free, I'll give it a shot.
And it's relaxing because it's not you're not furiously dodge or parrying. Obviously, it's turn based. So it's got a story mode. Come on,
yes!
Nima, how have you not played it? You've played everything for at least 2 hours.
No, there's a few games I've missed along the way. I don't know. I'm trying to think which game would I recommend for you guys now. So with these class systems, have you? I'm trying to think. Have you ever done anything that's like more of an iconic build or like a meme build, or just something that's a bit of a joke class? Like I know we always laugh, PJ, about like Elden Ring, like torch run, like you only have a torch for the whole game with no armor on, or have you ever done anything like that? Like just a really messed up class, or like maybe you put all your skills in a Fallout into charisma and luck and try to like use no weapons at all.
Not for not as a main person, no. So I have done it in in games like Baldur's Gate, another one, and I did it in Wasteland 3, where you can just use, you can basically make a joke party character to kind of sometimes bring in. There's like a mime or what, where you can come in and just do nothing but insult people and are just useless and then just get killed invariably. But it's kind of quite fun to have them. But I would never do it in a game where I had to physically kind of play the narrative as that. I could just
playing if I was playing it seriously, I think it's kind of it's a replay, isn't it, where you start to really mess around with it. Right. Okay. Let's kind of just zero in on kind of, I guess, the four classes and the archetypes as PJ mentioned right at the top. Starting with warrior, and kind of you've nearly your bread and butter. Key question here, lads, I think, is why does it almost always suck? Is it just because, reflecting on what you said earlier on about your mate Nima, that you just kind of end up being the tank in the end game effectively towards the end? I remember in World of Warcraft, there was that kind of a real sort of, like, if someone was a DPS warrior, for example, everyone would be like, mate, what the fuck are you doing? Just get your shield out and start tanking.
Yeah, that's the problem, PJ. So imagine they invite you to a party and they're like, oh, you're a warrior, PJ, lies of PJs, they say, and we'll let you in. And then you show up and they're like, why is he holding two swords? We thought this bastard was going to have a shield and going to defend us. And you're like, no, I need defending too. Where's the tank? And they're all looking at you like, look, mate, I don't care what your spec is. Just take one of your swords off and put on a fucking shield. And you're like, but I'm not even spec'd for Guardian. And they're like, we don't care. We're going to kick you from the party if you don't put the shield on. It's brutal, isn't it? But I think some games do it well, right? So I think what you're saying is, like, in Skyrim, that's a bad warrior for me. So like just playing like a pure sword and board warrior, it just feels so dry compared to every other class you could play. So I think that's why I feel like it's almost always bad. But there are games where kind of crowd control and the taunting is quite exciting, because I did try to play a tank, but at lower levels, Tom. So I like leveled like a paladin, and I leveled a druid, which I turned into a bear. And I did a few of the lower level dungeons, and it's quite nice feeling like you hold the life of your whole party in your hand. And if you can't keep the attention of all the enemies, your friends who are like trying to output damage so fast, they're just going to get one-shotted, all of them. So you very much become quite vital in that sense. And I thought that was quite fun.
You're effectively the defensive midfielder of a centre back of the team. Which is like the unsexiest position to play almost, right? And I just feel like it's not fun, PJ. That's the thing with Warrior.
I think it's particularly strange that it's obviously such a regular use of class in games where you don't have that kind of party setup. So if you think of all the kind of combat-driven games, not all the Dark Soul games, which have sold millions and put combat in the front and center, you're invariably a version of a warrior. Your choice there is dex or dexterity or strength. Really, are you a fast warrior who hits loads, or are you a slow warrior who hits hard? And that's kind of your choice. Yeah, there's a bit of magic kind of chucked in there for good measure, but there's a few kind of like that, where there's lots of games which are very combat driven, and it's invariably you're some form of warrior. It's quite rare that you get an RPG where you have to be a mage. There is no other option. You are a wizard, and you are playing this whole game.
You're a wizard, Harry.
Yeah, exactly. It tends to be something that is introduced and then expanded on in that larger kind of party setting. But I mean, I don't know. I think of lots of rogues, lots of archers, lots of obviously warriors of various kinds, but any kind of single player kind of game in that sense where you are a sorcerer of some capacity. Yeah, you could be. You could say Hogwarts. Maybe Fable. Are you? I can't remember if you play Fable.
No, that was you chose. So you
chose Fable,
you read yellow. You read yellow and green. I think it was maybe blue as well. And you got to then put it in.
Maybe the Assassin's Creed games, I suppose. They're warriors, aren't they? Again, so
Well, that's only Ivor. I think. I think the initial and Alexios / Alessandra. That was kind of where that was. But a lot of the time in Assassin's Creed, take a slice onto Rogue. That's kind of where that was. And I suppose kind of, I only really touch this class, Nima, if it is kind of first person. Like in third person, I think they're always quite nice as kind of that kind of the playable character / the NPC that accompanies you. Just that I never like being the rogue myself, if that makes sense. It's never really kind of quite got with me because of the fact I love AoE, and as you said earlier on, you
There's
don't
just
really have much of
no
that.
crowd. There's, like, you can like kind of stun someone and fight the other guy, but you can't do much more. Like, it's very hard to hit two opponents at the same time with a swing, unless you specialize that way. And even then, you're not going to be as good as a warrior or a mage. So, yeah, I think in the current Assassin's Creed Shadows, what I will say is that the kind of stealth components of playing as the Naoe, the main female character, it is probably the best I've seen in Assassin's Creed since the OG games. Because you can, if you want to, like, go through all the castles, forts, whatever, like, and just your main goal is to just play the entire thing in stealth. And actually, she's way stronger playing with the kind of hidden blade, if you like, and doing those kind of double assassinations make a return as well. So it truly feels like that is something they've done very well. But then on the flip side, you can become that brute warrior in Yasuke, and you can just run into like a fort and just kill everyone like so easily and take so many hits. And he can't climb, he can't traverse, he's slow and clunky, but it does sometimes feel badass and nice to just like, that's the nice way I've seen it done, right? You have two characters in the main story. You can play stealth as much as you like with Rogue, and then every once in a while switch to the brute force.
I did like in Assassin's Creed Odyssey in particular, when I was Cassandra, I thought that had an excellent combat system, and that had a really good mix where the melee combat was really good, but the control system was good enough that you could fire your bow mid-fight, kind of, pick off like headshots and then kind of dive back into melee. That was a really good example of that. And indeed, even some of the kind of special skills you would unlock as you went on could almost be considered kind of mage like. So that was a very hybrid class. They never for me managed to get to that peak again. It's not just that the Odyssey setting is a favorite for me. I think it's also the combat was a peak of the Assassin's Creed gaming. And the other one I think is worth mentioning, which is a question in terms of where she fits, but one of the I've mentioned her a couple of weeks ago, one of the favorite characters I've ever played is Aloy in the Forbidden West games, and that is she's very much an archer, but she's not a stealth archer. But I suppose you could say that the way that you have to lay traps kind of around the battlefield for the dino bots and everything. But again, the archery in that was really satisfying to play. It was, the clunk and the sound and the vibration and everything. That was really good. But I'd say she was a warrior archer rather than a rogue, really.
Yeah, no,
I wouldn't see her as a rogue. Yeah.
I think that there are definitely some elements of it, aren't there? There's like pre-planning, isn't there, with the setting up the traps and the tripwires and all that sort of thing. I think that was really cool. And there was always the opportunity to kind of just run in and brute force everything if you really wanted to. But as you say, that there was a lot of satisfaction in setting that up properly. I don't know. I always see. I'm thinking now of God of War, when you got Kratos and then you had a kind of Atreus or Freya in Ragnarok. It was nice to have them as kind of your, and this is kind of rightly or wrongly how I kind of tend to see the rogue class. If you've got kind of either a choice or kind of just the way you would lay it out, I think God of War did it really well. Where you had kind of your kind of your Kratos doing the main sort of hand to hand, and the rogue providing that sort of range support or maybe some close combat support to some extent. But that was kind of the best way of looking at it, even though kind of Kratos was doing most of the damage. It was nice to have that sort of the ancillary skills that those guys brought to the fore.
Yeah, and that was a good example of, and a few games do this, whereby you could adjust the settings, so you could be kind of quite lazy with it. You could put your kind of mage healer sidekick on kind of autopilot, which kind of meant that they would invariably deliver you like a 7 out of 10 performance in every battle. Or you could take all that on manually, which meant that, if you were very, very good at the game, you could get right up to a 10. But if you were terrible, you would just completely forget to control them and wonder why you're dying all the time. So, and I certainly struggled with that the first time I played God of War, not realizing there was particular settings. I was like, oh, what? I've got to control this person as well? Yeah. But then, once you get used to it, and that muscle memory kicks in. But that's a good example of where you've got that kind of sidekick almost, which I like to just kind of help you out on the battlefield, really.
I think companions, right? It's kind of like companions or pets. It goes back to that idea of classes. Maybe the reason you liked hunter or warlock is because they did have a summon. You could summon someone, a pet. You can find a random beast in the wild and enlist them and train them. There's something fun about that. I find games like, where you're just walking solo through a wild expanse like Geralt, when Roach isn't there as a companion and he doesn't do anything in combat, it is kind of lonely sometimes in that brute, dark world, and like poverty and monsters taking over. It's just very gloomy in the main region as well. And I think, like, what do you think about that kind of idea? Because God of War, you do have your son, you chat to him the whole way through. There's lots of fun dialogue, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very funny game. I did love the companion system in Skyrim, I've got to say, for all its faults. The fact that you could choose whether you wanted, you could just basically go and have a mage as your sidekick or have a warrior tank as your sidekick. You could only get one, couldn't you? And they could die, which was always problematic. Then you'd have to nickel their loot. And be
or run
overburdened.
into basically the entire dungeon and take them to you when you're trying to stealth archer on the side, and suddenly they run back with the entire dungeon chasing. God's sake, Lydia, not again, Lydia, not again.
I do like that system where you can choose, like, to kind of have somebody with you for periods, as it were, where you can kind of dip in and out of them. God of War, you couldn't have that choice, but it did it. It wasn't all the time. The other companion, they came in and out, as it were, and I do like that. I do like that.
I suppose these two, warrior and rogue, also have access to the greatest array of different weapons and different armor as well. And that can be the biggest lure for a lot of people about playing warrior. Even though we kind of gave a short shrift that you get to use, the ornaments of doom, the massive two-hander, which you attack every 3 seconds. But my lord, if you land it, what an attack that is. And you get to put all the plated armor on, or if you've got like a companion, or if you're in in Dragon Age, for example, you just basically make whoever the tank is, if it's Cassandra or Iron Bull, you just kind of basically just shove them up into all sorts of plate heavy armor, absorb all sorts of damage, make them into a taunt machine, and that can be really cool. And in the rogue side, obviously, you get kind of really cool weapons eventually, which you can see on your character, and that can be really nice, and figure out all the combos of different bits and pieces. So I suppose if we come from an armament perspective, Nima, these two perhaps are the ones where you make the most of the in-game equipment almost, and I suppose that can be a big draw to people, which maybe we've sort of not discussed too much.
That is a good point. And some people love crafting, right? So if you can craft like leather armor as a rogue, mail or plate armor as a warrior, take up something like blacksmithing, mining, skinning professions. So I always love the idea of having one gathering profession that gets the materials you need and one that crafts the item you want. Now, for a mage, there is the equivalent, right? There's, I guess you can become, I've forgotten the name now, this guy, tailor. Yeah, you can become a tailor, right? And you can use cloth to make your armor, but I don't think that's quite sexy. That doesn't sound so fun. I'd rather, as a mage, be a herbalist and an alchemist and create potions like Geralt does. So yeah, I think for me, these two, being able to wear so many different types of armor, being able to wear, different weapons, it can be fun, right? If you can only have a staff or a dagger or a wand, like it's a bit lame standing there with a little stick, like 6 centimeters stick in your hand for like 90 hours looking at your character with a...
Well, hang on. Let's not bring Paddy into this.
But it's not a weapon itself, and that's the point. And this brings us neatly onto mage, in the sense that, like, you don't do anything generally. Your mage stick is just a fucking stick. It might be a different color sometimes, whereas, like you say, warriors will often have this bastion of different weaponry that they can use, but it's still never as many as the amount of spells, generally speaking, that a mage has access to. So it doesn't matter that you're carrying the same weapon for most of the game. You can often go down so many kind of different routes. Even the most basic kind of RPG will have that mage class probably split into kind of 3 or 4, between a kind of conjurer, somebody who kind of like, and kind of a necromancer of some description, and someone who kind of controls nature and everything. So there's instantly kind of a few kind of different routes that you can kind of go down with it, which are just a lot a lot more fun. And I think we've mentioned that those AoE spells. Is that what makes or breaks the class to you, Tom? Or
I think so. I think that you do get, like with warrior, I'm thinking like cleave and things like that, where you've got that side of it, and if you've got a very small number of um, abilities that you can use in your arsenal. So on World of Warcraft, you've got a massive UI that you can put in all sorts of kind of things, but normally you've got a set of 4 or 6 kind of main abilities you can use when you're kind of live active in game. And I always look at AoE and kind of doing that sort of multi-target damage because it's just more efficient, isn't it? And in terms of the mage / wizard side of things, that is where that always tends to inhabit. But I suppose being a glass cannon, as it were, Nima, does always mean that, yes, it's great fun to be a damage dealer, but it can come at great cost. So if you are, Nima the rogue, lying in the shadows looking for a wife and targeting, looking for an easy target in terms of getting on a kill, you're always vulnerable, aren't you? And I suppose that's kind of the trade-off with it, that you kind of have high damage, but you've also got high vulnerability. Thinking of the high elves in Skyrim almost, where you're just massively vulnerable to everything, basically.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think of like the mages I like best, and for me, it's always the ones with AoE, and it doesn't even have to be like, I don't like spells where you have to like aim in the distance. I actually prefer AoE where it's like around me, so it's almost like the enemies have got too close, and I can like push them all back with a spell, and they all take damage, and then I can kind of get out of that little jam I was stuck in. And so although you're a glass cannon, I do think like when I was a rogue, I tried to sometimes get a quick kill, and like a rival mage will see me and just quickly like turn me into a sheep, and then I'm like kind of stuck for 10 seconds, and they'll like do a runner, or they'll put me in and like my feet will be locked in an ice block, and then their friends will show up and all mass murder me. Like, so there is always risk for me as well as a rogue. I think in some ways, at least with a mage, you can kind of like go in and be OP, right? You can be overpowered. Like if you're built correctly, you can delete entire screens of enemies, like in most single player games.
Yeah, you can, or you can blink away.
Well, I've got a quick question for you, Nima, just in terms of whether in that type of the World of Warcraft kind of style games setting, one of the things I'm interested in whether you guys like is when you play kind of games like kind of Boulders or recently in Clair Obscura, where you have like that party where you can kind of combine your ability. So someone will put a mark or a stain on somebody, and then you realize they're weak to fire damage. Or in Baldur's Gate, someone will chuck a barrel of grease. Then someone will go in with a fire spell. Then someone will go in with the ice spell. It's like, well, when you're playing a more kind of kinetic, kind of like fast action online game, is there any of that kind of synergy, or is it just an absolute fucking free for all?
I think with voice comms there can be. So if you're playing like at the top level and you're like competing in tournaments, people will be like on microphones in Discord, right?
Yeah.
Because I used to do arena sometimes. So in Battlegrounds, there was never that kind of coordination. It would be like 10v10, 20v20, capture the flag, first to free, things like that, right? Take objectives. But in arena, that was a different kettle of fish, PJ. That was like 2v2, 3v3, or 5v5.
I remember it well.
And that was wild because you needed to be in voice comms. If you weren't, your opposition team was going to win because they probably were in voice comms. And even in Call of Duty, I know we're talking about guns next week, but like, again, there's a level at which there's certain modes like search and destroy where if you get shot, you're dead for the rest of the round. So like one team is trying to plant a missile or an explosive on your base, and one team is defending that round. And if the defending team kill all the people who have a bomb, they win the round. But if the bomb gets planted and explodes before it's defused, that team wins. So in that scenario, it might be 4v4, 5v5, and you need to be telling each other where you saw the enemy at exactly what moment. That communication ability is so important. And Paddy will tell you this, like he was screaming at me in FIFA Pro Clubs a few years ago saying, stop holding the sprint button. And then I'd always be like knackered by the second half because I permanently had the R2 button down.
Oh, God.
So I think communication is a key part of it, PJ, for me, where in those kind of games, there is definitely an element of what you said from single player party mode, but you need to communicate with people, and you need people who are going to be willing to not get upset, take constructive feedback, right? Like it's kind of tough. People get offended, threaten to kill you.
Just to
Yeah.
clarify.
Yeah,
Yeah, they threatened to kill you online just because you made a mistake. Do you know what I mean?
I think in the PVE setting as well. So when you were like on a raid in World of Warcraft, there's 40 or 25 as it was later on. Then you were fighting, like a boss with huge HP, and you had loads of different phases, a bit like Terra Obscura and a bit like I guess with Elden Ring as well. Lots of phases of the fight, and you had everybody in the team needed to know what to do on each different phase of the fight. So you had a few kind of times when you started where everyone needs to learn kind of what they need to do. You'd wipe all the time, and then you have to, everyone needs to apply their own different bits and pieces. There's a certain way of playing this particular boss, and sometimes I guess there is a lot of synergy a lot of the time to kind of just basically protect your spellcasters. And it's more fun. It's most fun.
I'm just a big fan of that. I think in that kind of setting where because more of a kind of single player games, but just that ability to combine your attacks actually makes a party kind of make sense. And I never, when I first started playing this type of games, I never really understood. I would just attack as my warrior, then I would attack as my archer, then I would attack as my mage, without that kind of understanding of the kind of combining their builds and their skills kind of together. That was something I learned. So yeah, it's good to know that. So let's move on to the kind of final class, which is, who's the poor bastard in these parties who has to play as a healer, just basically doing nothing but kind of running around. It reminds me when my kids play Minecraft, and the youngest person who is always the youngest person who they've managed to drag in from the garden to play it with them is just being sent off to collect wood endlessly. And this is this person whose sole job is to just heal others. Is there any fun in that build for you?
So if warrior again, I think it's an awkward juxtaposition, isn't it, talking about football when we're doing a gaming podcast? But if warrior is the defensive midfielder, the cleric is the goalkeeper of the team, and it's the most altruistic thing to do. And there's definitely a rush in doing that within the team kind of context if you're on a game like World of Warcraft. But I think what I've noticed, and I don't know if you guys noticed this as well, but on Dragon Age Origins there was one character who was kind of a solely devoted to healing. That was kind of her kind of remit. That's what she did. But then that kind of got removed as it kind of went forward, and you don't really see there being a kind of a Gestalt cleric class as much anymore. It's now the healing spells are sort of bound up in mage, or a warrior is able to heal themselves, or their sort of I guess kind of lifesteal sort of abilities which are out there a lot of the time. And it kind of feels like this is more the fun zone class effectively, where you have that specific sort of bit of it extra game, that extra bit in every game that kind of gives it its character a little bit. So I guess you've got the wacky extras in Expedition 33, CL doing a mixture of kind of the Foretell and the Twilight stuff, where you've got Minoko doing whatever the hell he does. I'm not sure how you kind of simplify that, PJ, in some ways, but it really feels like this one kind of is more of the wild card factor now, and where kind of developers seem to have a lot of fun in thinking about how do I have a particular style of character where there's some kind of specificity when it comes to my game, and it kind of comes from the lore of the game, as it were, this particular kind of archetype more than ever. Because I think cleric is kind of the one that kind of comes right out in those ways, because the core skill is healing. That can be definitely transported out to other areas. And then, hey, you know what? If it's a 4-person kind of party, you then got more to play with, and you didn't have one character, as you kind of mentioned earlier, who's just sat there, heal, and that's all they do. Because I think that's just not fun for the player a lot of the time. Maybe.
No, definitely not. It's not for me. It's someone, and it's often a space that you obviously have to use, because you invariably need, unless you're exceptional at the game or you're playing on a very easy difficulty setting, you need that kind of person to kind of heal you kind of during particularly the longer fights, boss fights that often happen in any form of gaming. You need that person to kind of constantly do it. And I just find it something that's often just lazily done. I like when it's kind of kind of included in the narrative. Again, I like the way that the Witcher used kind of different ways that you could kind of do it, which kind of made sense in terms of you could use particular kind of potion buffs, but then there was regular kind of food, there was kind of lifesteal kind of like you say, kind of skills in there as well that you could also utilize. And I do like it when they're just a little bit more creative, rather than just having to take somebody as 25% of your party to just throw, healing, and that's their whole turn. Oh yes, it's Shadowheart again. And the thing about to bring like Shadowheart, who is a cleric in Baldur's Gate 3, Shadowheart is probably the most overpowered player in the game as an attacking unit. But you have to, if you play it traditionally, obviously, as you start multi-clasking and you've played it many times, you'll probably do things differently. But on most people's first playthrough, they're going to just use her as a healer because she's the only fucking healer they give you. So it's like you're just using the character who also has the best arc from a story perspective in the entire game, just as somebody who you have to take in every battlefield just to keep you alive. And I just find that's just a little bit lazy sometimes in terms of find a metric where I don't have to waste one of my spots on somebody who is just there to keep the other 3 people alive.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think, Fema?
I think normally most games I've played, it's like a 3-party max. So I think for me, I always just kind of get the tank to kind of become the healer, because I'm like, well, this guy's got the most like durability. So if he's about to die, he should heal himself. And if someone else is about to die, hopefully he can heal them too. So it's kind of, that's what ends up happening for me. But I do think support classes, more pure versions of them at least, where I have played like MOBAs more recently than I've played WoW, I've always felt that they feel quite thankless and underpowered. And it's basically depends on what your team do, right? So I think in a single player game, you can get the most out of that healer class. You can, make sure like your frontline mage is healed and never dies, right? But in online, unless you're coordinated and there's voice comms, people are basically hating on you. But like, so to give you an example, PJ, like let's say I've got an ability that's got a cooldown of 1 minute or 2 minutes. We're in the end game. I give someone a shield for 4 seconds that are invulnerable. But in that time, I need them to complete an objective or do something. And then I give it to them and I watch the idiot run the opposite way and the rest of the team wipe because he left them. It's just, at some point, it gets quite frustrating playing games where you might have to invest 20 to 40 minutes for one match, right? And the whole game could just be thrown. No matter what you do, everyone hates you regardless of doing this thankless task. And your best abilities can't shine unless everyone perfectly does things at the exact right time. Most people will blame you.
The goalkeeper. You're the goalkeeper, aren't you? Yeah, that's literally what it is. But it's so true.
I like in Final Fantasy, the remakes of the Rebirth ones. I know you've got Aerith there as the kind of resident healer, but I like the fact that you can change the mana around so that you can give that healing ability to any of the characters. You don't need her in any way, shape, or form. And again, it's that balance. The Dark Souls games do this as well, where it's that balance in terms of how much of your inventory essentially is taken up by that ability to heal yourself, and it becomes just a bit of a skill issue, which I like. I love the mechanic in Bloodborne where you if you get hit, the only way you can regain the damage you've lost is by successfully landing hits on the opposition. Just encourages an incredibly aggressive play, whereas I think the natural stance of somebody is as soon as they get hit or they're getting killed is to back off. Bloodborne would just slaughtered you for that. You've got to go on the aggressive, so you get rewarded.
And you had a short time, right? So it's if you didn't get the hits in within like seconds, then the healing's gone.
And I like that. And I like games, again, where they're being creative with that healing mechanic. Divinity 2, which is what Baldur's Gate was kind of loosely kind of based on, obviously what the guys who made it did before. That was really good in terms of that didn't really have a healer class, but it had so many different kind of armor and kind of potions and sort of stuff you would pick up that would buff you to make you kind of immune to kind of certain things. So again, it was a bit of a balance, and it was that type of research of I'm going into an area with enemies that are going to throw a load of dark damage at me or something. So have I got that piece of armor that's going to make me much more suited to this particular zone kind of thing? And if not, no healer is going to be able to save the day anyway, because I've not kind of equipped properly for it. And I like that as well, where you're just being a little bit more kind of creative in terms of. I think so many games that we'll cover this in other pods, and I know we've gone on a little bit of this one, so we'll wrap it up shortly. But where they've lots of games have different like level designs and sort of stuff. You might have a desert and then a forest, and a plain and a grasslands, but actually they don't actually tie in or make any difference other than the obligatory poison swamp to actually any of your fucking classes.
Or the undead area. The undead area, PJ.
Yeah. So anyway, but so that was all I had to say. Tom, anything else?
No, I think it's really interesting, isn't it? How this all sort of fits together. I think some of it kind of comes to kind of who you are as a person. I think some of it comes to the perspective versus first, and I think a lot of it as well comes down to just kind of where you derive the most fun, be it on an online setting if you're playing an MMO, if you're an altruist, or if you're more of a hedonist, I guess, in terms of damage dealing. If you've got that kind of main character energy, like you do if you're playing a solo RPG, you want to be a damage dealer, or if you're more story led. That's where kind of a damage dealer, perhaps kind of with particular traits, when you get to a roguish sort of individual, does sort of lead you down one particular road. Really interesting as a way to look at it. I know that we kind of haven't spoken about gunplay. We'll do that next week with Paddy, because I think that's kind of definitely more his bag, whereas this one was much more Nima's bag. So we'll kind of make that into part of next week's pods as part of that, and also parrying and blocking, which I'm really looking forward to. All the ribbing I'm going to get about being unable to parry at all. But I think that it's always fascinating to see the way in which people do kind of default to different areas. We are more sort of magey, PJ and I, but good to have you on, Nima, for your roguish takes for this one. It's always really fascinating to see how these things go. Just a reminder of our socials to end: Over Encumbered Pod on Bluesky and YouTube and TikTok. Dale has set up lots of different bits and pieces of us talking over on TikTok. I believe we are now up to 30 followers, so world domination is surely nigh.
46, I think.
46. Well, okay,
yeah,
right.
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
I'm quitting my job. I'm a full-time gaming content creator now.
Yeah,
0ver_encumbered on the shit show, created by Musk. Do not know. If you enjoyed the pods of the show, please do one or all of the following: follow us on socials, give the pod a 5-star rating on Spotify, iTunes, whatever, or a like, and subscribe on YouTube if you're watching on there. Thanks so much, Nima. I assume you're off to do, I don't even know, Christ, what game you're going to play now, or are you going to do some walking, do some kind of?
So I do actually need to walk the dog because I didn't get a chance before the show, but I've been playing. I'm gonna play some Splatoon 3 or maybe Mario Kart, just a quick session for 10 minutes because it's a bit late tonight. But I need to keep up. I have one game for Switch, one game for PlayStation, one game for PC. When I turn my PC on for the first time in like 3-4 weeks, I'll give you guys my feedback on Act 2 of Expedition 33. But I have been lagging on that game. It's been a month, I think, since I played it.
Even I'll be done by then. That's mad. Actually, no. I think we'll be playing Expedition 34 by the time you're done. I think.
Yeah. No. Neither of you will have been done like I was, but yeah, don't do that. Once again, I will end this pod by saying, do not complete Act 3. Claire Obscura 33. I beg you.
Yeah, thanks so much for your time, PJ, today, as always. Nice one. Thanks all. We'll be back next week on the usual Tuesday. Stay mobile, everybody. Hello?